Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Lee Hayes Byron, and I'm the director here at Sarasota County U of IFAS Extension and Sustainability. Today's class is Climate Change, a Solutions Approach. And I'm really happy you've joined because it's a topic that a lot of people have been discussing, and it's top of mind for some of us here in Sarasota County, given a difficult hurricane season. So this is what I'm going to share with you today. And let me just start by explaining who Extension is. If you're not familiar with Extension, we are a partnership between Sarasota County and the University of Florida, as well as the U.S. Department of Agriculture. There's an Extension office in every county in Florida. And we here in Sarasota County provide connection to university research specific to community needs and on topics that are relevant to our community. So we're really trying to educate residents, professionals, decision makers, and youth about a whole range of topics. And those topics range from agriculture, gardening and landscaping, natural resources, sustainability, what we're doing today, nutrition and healthy living, and then of course the 4-H program that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We are intended to be Extension for all, so please be sure we want to make sure you feel welcome and are here if you have any questions or about access. Today we're going to talk about climate change and the various, both what the science says, and that might be about impacts, and it also might be about the social science, about what our residents think. So I want to provide this overview of the science from both a climate science and a social science perspective. And then after that, we're going to jump from the science directly into what can we do about it, these solutions that are really so important and readily available. We're going to talk about that both at the global level and locally here in Sarasota County, Florida. So hopefully that's in line with what you all were thinking we would cover today. I would encourage you to please put your questions in the chat and share any experiences you have, and I'll stop sort of partway through as we go and have a look at the chat and go from there. I want to let you know that we are recording this session, and we would like to be able to put it up on our YouTube channel so others can see it in the future. We will not use any of the images, but I just wanted to give you a heads up about that. So go ahead, while we're getting started, if you don't mind, in the chat, if you can put what interested you in this program, what you were hoping to learn today, and I'll have a look at that and make sure I cover it. All right, the other thing to know is that this is an interactive class. So once we get past the science section, in the what can we do about it section, I'm going to ask you all to be a part of it. So get ready. I'm going to have some polls to share with you, and I'm going to ask you all to answer some questions. So the second half of this, you're going to be participating, I hope. Let's jump in. So the first question that I often get asked is, how do we know this is actually happening? How is climate change showing up in our world? And you can see it in all of these ways. And I'll share that this was predicted as the impacts that climate change would have 30, 40 years ago. And now we are actually seeing it happening now. So this is not a what will happen. This is what we're actually seeing in the headlines of the newspapers and in the news. So we are seeing increasing heat, more heat waves. We're seeing more drops in wildfires. We're seeing in coral damage. And we're also seeing changes in rain patterns and precipitation. So these things are happening now. They aren't just predictions. This set of graphs is not meant for you to dig into the details. It's just meant to show trends and to show that those trends are consistent. So all of the ones that are trending up relate to the heat that is increasing on our planet. So we're seeing increasing sea surface, marine air temperatures, and then that relates to the sea level rise that we are seeing as well. The ones that are going down are related to snow and ice. So you see decreased snow cover, decreased Arctic ice extent, and decreased glacier mass balance. So this is back to 1850 in some cases and 1940 in others. And it's really just meant to show that the trends are consistent with what the data is showing across multiple indicators. So what does that look like in terms of the emissions themselves? If you're familiar with climate change, it's related to what are called greenhouse gas emissions, the most common of which is carbon dioxide, and that has been tracked at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii for many years. And this graph shows that data, including the latest carbon dioxide atmospheric reading, specifically from December 2nd. I just downloaded this today. And you can see that the latest reading is 424 parts per million. And the trend over the last several hundred years was very consistent for many, many years. And then once the fossil fuel consumption really ramped up, you can see in the 1960s and 70s that curve has really amplified much more quickly than it had been before. So now to the social science. What does social science tell us about how Americans feel about whether this is actually happening? So the percent of adults who think global warming is happening from Yale's Climate Opinion Survey in 2023 shows that nationally, 72% of Americans think it's actually happening. We are seeing these things happening. Here in Sarasota County, it's very close to that at 71%. So pretty good agreement that this is happening. These impacts are happening. Now, when you ask the question of what's causing it, the science shows that separately, the natural factors that could cause global warming are shown in the green band on the bottom of this graph. When you include natural and human factors in models, that's the blue band. And when you look at the actual observations that they are looking at for global temperature, that's the black line. So the blue and the green are what would be modeled for those causes. And the black line is actual observations of temperature changes. And you can see that the only way to match the actual observations is if you include those human factors. Natural factors like where we are in relation to the sun or cycles of our sort of planetary movements, those kinds of things do not explain the observed increases in temperature. So that tells us that it is in fact human factors that are causing this increase over the last several decades. So how about the social science on that question? What percent of Americans think global warming is caused by humans? Nationally, that's less. It's at 58%. And here in Sarasota County, we are right in line with that, also at 58%. So still a significant majority, but not as high, and some questions among Americans on the cause. But again, the majority agree with the scientists that it is human caused. And where does that human interference come? It comes in the form of power plants, the greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels and power plants. It comes from our built environment, the energy used in our buildings. It comes from the energy used in our vehicles, our transportation sector, on the ground and in the air. And it also comes from the waste we produce. Our landfills actually produce methane, which is a very strong greenhouse gas, as does our agriculture sector. And then land use change itself, going from, say, a forested piece of land to a developed neighborhood, that releases the stored carbon that is in the trees and in the soil. And so that decreases the sinks that those living plant material were holding into the atmosphere, and results in higher emissions as a result of that. And you can see that same thing in agriculture as well, in the changes in the soil as a result of agricultural practices. So this pie chart shows you for the United States in 2023, where were emissions coming from? And you can see that it's pretty evenly divided between commercial and residential buildings, the industrial sector, and our transportation sector, with a small piece coming from the agriculture sector. This is an interesting graph that comes from the organization Project Drawdown, and they look at it in terms of those emissions versus sinks. So emissions are on the left side, and they come from electricity production, food and agriculture and land use, industrial and transportation emissions and buildings. And then you think about if there were enough sinks to hold all of that, where would those come from? There aren't, but those sinks that are absorbing much of that are in the land and the ocean, with 59% of it not being absorbed by those sinks, if that makes sense. I think this is a really interesting way to see both sides of that atmospheric balance. So what kind of impacts can that result in? These temperature changes are very clearly providing sea level rise. Here on the Gulf Coast of Florida at our St. Petersburg tide gauge, we've seen an increase in our sea level since around the 1980s. And that increase is actually increasing its rate. So yes, it's going up, but it's also going up at a faster pace, as you can see in that last decade. So what does that mean going forward? This is the projection for sea level rise at that St. Petersburg tide gauge. And you can see that what happens in the future very significantly depends on what decisions are made now in terms of the emissions that our planet releases, our people around the world release. So if it's high emissions in that yellow line, you can see the sea level rise is much more extreme. But if we're able to make changes and decrease those emissions over time, that intermediate and intermediate low projections are much more reasonable in terms of the expected sea level rise into the end of the century. These are what sea level rise actually is currently looking like. This is a king tide on Siesta Key here in Sarasota. And this was 3 or 4 years ago. It was done as part of a king tide photo exhibition by Sarasota Bay Estuary Program. And this was just a normal tide, but the most extreme tide of the year. This was not from rain. This was not from storm surge. It was just a normal tide. And so what we say actually is that the high tide now is going to become the low tide in the future. So you can imagine a king tide in 20 years is really going to be in danger for that home in Siesta Key. This is a road on Longboat Key, also actually just on the other side of our boundary into Manatee County. And I was there on a king tide earlier, a couple of years ago. And behind this picture is the Intercoastal Waterway. And when a boat went by in the Intercoastal Waterway, the water in this road moved, right? So it is not from rain, it's actually from the bay coming into the street through the stormwater system. So this is, again, not from rain, not from storms, it's just a normal king tide. But when you then factor sea level rise in combination with storms and storm surge, that's when you start to see these very extreme floods that go much further than those king tides that you're seeing before. So these are some storms from a few years ago. You can see just 2020 and 2023 storms. These are Siesta Key Beach on the left. This is from the landward side. It's not supposed to be wet there. Then also some downtown infrastructure in Sarasota from what were then pretty minor storms that affected our community. Just this year, however, have not involved minor storms. Here in Sarasota, we've had very significant and frequent storms. We had 3 landfalls of storms, all of which resulted in flooding in different ways. Tropical Storm Debbie had intense precipitation that affected the inland portions of our county. And then Hurricane Helene in September had a intense storm surge on the coastal and barrier islands of our county. And then Hurricane Milton in October had almost the same effect from storm surge as Helene. So those communities were hit 2 months in a row with significant storm surge, sand intrusion, water intrusion, a lot of flooding, and we are still and will be for a while managing those impacts here in Sarasota County. So those are storm-related flooding and sea level rise flooding. These high tide flooding events, as in the king tide, are going to increase over time as sea levels increase. So you can see if we manage to get to the lower emissions scenario, the intensity and frequency of those floods will be lower versus the higher emissions scenario in red. Similarly, you can see the number of homes at risk of chronic inundation with moderate sea level by 2100 gets up into the tens and in some cases hundreds of thousands of homes, depending on where you are and how close they are to those waterways. And again, it's not just a coastal flooding issue. It can go up through rivers and creeks and affect people further inland as well. Now, another area of impact that is not talked about as much, but is becoming something people are more aware of, is extreme heat. We have seen, and science has shown that here locally, Bradenton, which is the town just north of us, has had 42 more days at 90 plus degrees Fahrenheit each year compared to the 1960s. And we expect that to be 75 more days by the year 2050. So that's becoming a very significant portion of our year. When I was growing up here in Florida, we really didn't go above 90 degrees that often in our summers. It felt hot then, but it is much hotter now. And you can see that there are paths, again, going forward, where if we can get to where there are significant cuts, that increase in average temperature here in Sarasota can be much lower. Or if we don't make those changes in our emissions, it will continue to increase the frequency of those extreme heat days. And this is a more regional approach on that projection as well. So if you're more in the southeast of the United States, you can see that projection here. So this part was really interesting data visualization from climatecentral.org. And they were looking at the warming over a lifetime. So if you think about, the baby boomer generation and Gen X, they've started to see this heat impact, but they really aren't going to see it as much as Gen Z and Gen Alpha that are going to see much bigger changes over their lifetimes if we don't address this emissions impact. And in terms of the social science, there's this really interesting study that Yale does, and they call it the 6 Americas. And what they've found is that there's sort of 6 groups of people in terms of how they feel related to climate change. And they range from alarmed, those who are most worried about it, down to dismissive, and those who don't think it's a big deal at all, don't pay attention. And so within those, there's different categories of people and how worried they are. And you can see that over time, the percentage of people who are alarmed, concerned, and cautious has really gone up. And the percentage of people who are disengaged or even down to dismissive has gone down. So the percent of adults who are worried about this at a national level is 64%, and here 62%. And this was 2023 data. So I'll be interested to see if that changes, particularly given the difficult hurricane season we've seen. Now, what should we do about it? The data actually shows that people feel that citizens should do more to address global warming. 61 and 60% of people feel that, yeah, we as individuals should do more to make a difference in this issue. 62% nationally think Congress should do more to address the issue. And 69% think that corporations, businesses should do more to address the issue. So they really feel like much of this burden of responsibility falls on large companies and those that are leading the choices on a big level, nationally and multinationally in terms of business operations. But so you have those very orange maps that show significant interest in action being taken. This survey has a really interesting question that says the percent of adults who discuss global warming at least occasionally. Nationally, that's only 36%. Here in Sarasota, it's 37%. So a little more than a third of us are actually talking about this issue, even though more than a majority of us are concerned and a big majority of us think that action actually should be taken. So this is where there's that disconnect. And if you're familiar with the climate scientist, Katharine Hayhoe, she has this YouTube video that a TED Talk that talks about the most important thing you can do to fight climate change is to talk about it. So to change that map from blue to orange, that our communities are worried about it, but we're not raising it to a point of conversation where we're actually talking about it with our neighbors and our family members and our leaders. So she talks about how important it is to raise that discussion. And then in summary, on the science side, I want to hopefully have conveyed to you that the climate impacts are real. They are being caused by humans. The scientists agree on this and the data agrees. The data is consistent. The trends are showing that all of this is happening and that it's a big deal. This is serious. We don't want you to get scared. We don't want you to sort of become paralyzed by the potential impacts, because there is hope. And that's what the second part of this discussion is going to be about today. And I want to thank Jennifer Schaefer of the Science Environment Council of Southwest Florida for helping develop this presentation. We've done this together in the past, and she's shared the slides so that I can continue doing it going forward. So that's the science part. I am going to jump to the solutions part, but let me take a minute to look at the chat box and see if there are any questions that we need to answer right now. Great. So thank you so much for sharing what interested you in this class today. I see that people are interested in what individuals can do to make a difference, and also that you've just sort of been seeing it in the news and wanted to educate yourself more and be as knowledgeable as you can be. So I'm so glad you've joined us today to do that. I am going to share some of what individuals can do, as well as some of what can be done on a larger level. And we will talk at the end about what that might mean for you all in terms of taking action. Okay, so I'm going to move to the what we can do about it section. And this is one of my favorite cartoons about the topic. It reflects one of the international climate change negotiation settings. And there's someone in the audience saying, but what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? Because what's great about climate solutions is actually they don't just target climate change. They result in climate benefit, but they also can do all the things that are on the screen there. They can help create green jobs, develop livable cities, help implement renewable energy and result in clean water and clean air and actual health improvements. So I love talking about those co-benefits, the things that result in both a climate and a community or social benefit. And so hopefully you'll start to see some of that as we talk about this next section. The way I like to talk about solutions, and then I think is really helpful, started by reading this book called Drawdown, which was edited by Paul Hawken, and he promotes it as the world's leading resource for climate solutions. There is a book, which is very well done, very accessible, but there's also an amazing website with lots of resources. So I'm going to use this as our framework for talking about these solutions, and we're going to do it in the form of a quiz. What they did with Drawdown is they brought together over 100 scientists from around the world, and they asked them to analyze and quantify the top 100 solutions for addressing climate change in the next 30 years. And so they said, not just what's on the horizon or what could happen. They only wanted them to focus on the solutions that were already available with the right investments and policies that could be put in place right away to make a real difference and reverse climate change within the next 30 years. And so they had all these scientists around the world work on these each individual solution, and the book outlines those 100 things, and each solution gets 2 pages with very clear outline of what the solution is and what the quantified benefits in terms of both climate change and cost reduction would be. And so what we're going to do is tackle those questions and just get a sense of what all of those solutions look like. And we're going to do it in the form of a quiz, which you'll find there are actually not really wrong answers because all of these are in the top 100, but it's just a fun and interactive way to introduce you to some of these solutions. So the first one we're going to do, and it's kind of a practice question, is of the top 100 solutions that were proposed in Drawdown, which one had the greatest potential impact? So I'm going to launch this quiz. It's a poll. You should see this on your screens now, and you can start choosing which of these things you think it is. Is it restoring tropical forests? Is it installing solar farms? Is it managing refrigerants? Or is it organic and regenerative agriculture? So you can start choosing which of those things you think it is. Which one ranked number 1? Figuring it out. I know it takes some thought. This one's just a practice. You're doing great. So I'm going to end this one just so you can show you what it's going to look like. The majority of you chose solar farms, but really it was a scattering of those answers. Like I said, all of them are top ranked solutions. But in this specific case, the correct answer was manage refrigerants. This is often one of the biggest surprises when people look into those drawdown solutions. There is an existing international agreement that was signed in 2016 called the Kigali Accord, and that phased out hydrofluorocarbons, which are refrigerants that have traditionally been used and are very strong greenhouse gases. So there's an existing effort to phase those out. What this does is sort of expedites that phase out and proposes proper disposal of existing refrigerants. So the Kigali Accord is about new appliances, refrigerators and air conditioners and those kinds of things. This drawdown analysis included also disposing of existing refrigerants in the proper way, and that makes a huge difference. And their goal is that we contain 87% of refrigerants within 30 years. And that results in an 89 gigaton benefit of carbon dioxide equivalent. And so that does come with a very large cost of $900 billion because it's all so distributed, right? If each of us think about when we get our refrigerators maintained or our air conditioning and heating systems maintained, each of those maintenance professionals needs to be reminded to please be very careful about capturing those refrigerants, making sure we don't have leaks, getting regular maintenance and all of that. So this one is one of the rare ones that actually has a significant cost, but it also came in at the biggest opportunity. All right, so I hope that initial quiz made sense to you. Now what we're going to do is just a series of questions of which one of these solutions ranked higher. And I'm going to go to our next question, which is, which of these ranked higher? Is it rooftop solar, afforestation, which means adding forests to previously deforested land, offshore wind turbines, or educating girls? You can put in your answers, see which one you think. You're getting it. We're getting fast here. All right. So the majority of you chose rooftop solar and then afforestation. A few of you chose educating girls, and that one actually came in highest at number 6 of all the solutions. And you might wonder sort of how does this relate to climate change? And what we've found is actually that educated girls in developing countries have far more productive agricultural crops. They are more resilient to natural disasters, and they have fewer offspring, which results in better health and better economic positions for them. And that has real quantifiable reductions in global emissions. So they set a goal of universal education in low and middle income countries by 2050. And the impact of that, quantifying all of those co-benefits in terms of carbon, is 59 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And that net benefit is really incalculable. They say that there's so many of those co-benefits in terms of health and well-being for these populations that they can't even put a number to it. So I love learning about this one and seeing how the social and the environmental benefits overlap in such an interesting way. All right, so our next one is two things that we talk about here in Sarasota County Extension fairly frequently. Which of these things ranked higher? Is it composting or reducing food waste? Getting quicker. I love it. Thank you so much for participating in this. All right, so the majority of you chose reducing food waste, and that actually is which ranked higher. It ranked at number 3 of all the 100 solutions. And again, people don't often think of the connection between food waste and climate change, but it is a significant contributor. So this is, they analyzed and found that the waste is both from the farm and the household. So they looked at the full cycle of food waste potential. And they also looked, and this is where a big portion of these emission savings came from, is from the avoided deforestation that isn't needed because you don't have to produce more food and clear more farmland, because you are better using the farmland that you have and wasting less of the food that's produced. So they set a goal of 50% food waste reduction by 2050 and found a 70 gigaton carbon dioxide equivalent benefit. So again, you're protecting the sinks of that forested land by not clearing it for agriculture, and you're also reducing the food waste along that supply chain to the home. All right, so our next one asks a question about which one ranked higher, rooftop solar or electric vehicles. Rooftop solar or electric vehicles. These are, I'm trying to share with you some of the more individual solutions because I know many of you were interested in what we can do as individuals. So the composting and food waste is something we can do at home. These solar and electric vehicles are individual choices and investments if we're able to do those. Right. So the majority of you chose electric vehicles, but you were really split on this one. And the higher ranked ended up being rooftop solar. This came in at number 10. And this is actually separate from utility scale solar or solar farms, which also ranked very high. And so together, the two kinds of solar, the individual solar and the utility solar, ranked very high in terms of particularly electricity decarbonization. So the benefit of what we're seeing here is that the prices of solar have been decreasing over time and the efficiency of the panels have been increasing. They set a goal of 7% of global electricity generation from rooftop solar by 2050. We're here in the Sunshine State, and I think we can do better than that by 2050. But it does take some incentives and some education for people to understand, because it is a big investment for them to put on their homes or businesses. And the impact of that is 24 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent and a net benefit of savings of $3.4 trillion in 30 years. So this is one of those that has a clear financial benefit to the people who are applying it, as well as a climate change benefit. You can also see that we're getting closer to this. The world is really at a turning point. We are at record renewable energy generation as on our global level. You can see that solar and wind are the yellow and blue, and those have really been increasing in the last 4, 5, 10 years. And that top pyramid of that graph is really increasing. You can also see that in terms of new power generation, what utilities are starting to lean toward, the clean and renewable sources are far outpacing the coal and natural gas that they previously were using for all new power generation. So they are really making that shift and making that turn. Okay, so what is next is two very small things that actually can make a very big difference. So we're gonna talk about smart thermostats and insulation. Both of these are in homes, residential. If you're done putting in your answers, if you don't mind sharing with me where you're joining us from today, I would love to know where our audience is. Put that in the chat box. All right. So the majority of you chose smart thermostats, and the answer actually was insulation, but they both ranked very high. Insulation came in at number 31. This is a really practical and cost-effective solution that I call a sort of a low-hanging fruit. It has a very high bang for your buck, and they set a goal of 54% of existing buildings installing insulation by 2030. And the impact for that is 8.3 gigatons and has a net savings, a dollar savings of $2.5 trillion in the next 30 years. This is a very simple thing, and I think many of you and us can actually commit to increase the insulation in our homes or businesses in the next 10 years. It just makes financial sense. In terms of smart thermostats, I just love that that made it onto their ranking in the top 100 at all. It is a technology that has just come onto the market in the last 5 to 7 years. So a brand new thing really has this huge potential to make a global impact of benefit. So if you don't have one yet, maybe look into them. They learn from you and your habits and make your home much more efficient. All right, so our next one is going to be between, again, two in-home solutions, LED lighting and water savings. Which of these do you think ranked higher? Okay, it's neck and neck. All right, so the majority of you chose water savings. LED lighting came in at number 33, so that came in slightly higher, but water savings was also up there. I think it's in the 40s. So LED lighting is the kind of bulbs and lighting fixtures that are much more efficient and cooler. A goal that they set is that 90% of household lighting market would be LED as opposed to incandescent by 2050. And I think that here in the United States anyway, we can achieve that much earlier. Our market in terms of what you can buy in the stores has really shifted to LED predominantly. And that's going to have a 7.8 gigaton benefit and a $1.7 trillion savings. Tremendous opportunity. It also reduces the heat inside your homes because the light bulbs don't get as hot, and that results in less power used for air conditioning, which I think is super cool. All right, so this next one is an interesting one. It compares two topics that are kind of controversial and sometimes come with a little bit of environmental shaming, which I think is really unfortunate. Our travel habits and the kinds of foods that we eat are very personal and cultural decisions. So this one is comparing airplane efficiency and a plant-rich diet as the two solutions. Which one do you think ranked higher? No. Airplane efficiency got a little bit higher, but it was very close. In this case, the plant-rich diet came in at number 4. You can tell I'm kind of trying to trick you a little bit here to make a point about the diversity of solutions that are out there. But the data is very strong and involved a lot of analysis. And so what they found here is that by choosing a plant-rich diet, we are shifting to a food system that increases our health and also avoids those deforestation benefits that we talked about before. So by shifting more to plants as opposed to animals, you're eating lower on the food chain. That requires less resources, less land, and therefore less deforestation for agriculture and ranching. And their goal was that 50% of the global population would restrict their diet to 2,500 calories per day and reduce their meat consumption. This is not analyzing everyone going vegan. That's not what they're proposing. It's just a reduction and what you might call a reducitarian. So that might be a meatless Monday. It might be something where you just try to increase the amount of plants or the percentage of a plant-based diet in your food choices. Not going completely vegetarian or vegan, just making that shift along the spectrum, becoming a reducitarian. And that could have a 66 gigaton carbon dioxide benefit. And the cost, they said, was variable, and they didn't have that quantification on that side, but it clearly has a strong climate benefit. All right, so The last of these comparison questions is one that is really interesting to me and a little bit close to home. So which do you think ranked higher, cool and green roofs or preserving and restoring coastal wetlands? So let's see. Oops, sorry. I'm still sharing here. We're going to go to this one and then we're going to launch it. There we go. So for cool and green roofs, those are reflective roofs and also roofs with plant material on the top. Both of those protect the building and reduce the amount of heat that enters the building. And then coastal wetlands, we're talking about both preserving and restoring coastal wetlands. So which of those do you think ranked higher? This one was really neck and neck because they're both really valuable solutions. In this case, coastal wetlands came in just a little bit ahead at number 52. We talk about preserving them as well as restoring them with the goal of carbon sequestration. Coastal wetlands are among the highest value in terms of carbon sequestration value for habitats. And that's because they sequester carbon both above the ground and the water, but also beneath it in the soil and also in the captured what we call detritus, the fallen leaf litter that gets captured beneath, say, the mangrove fringe here and builds up the organic matter in that soil and in the water around those coastal wetlands. Their goal is that 57 million more acres would be protected by 2050. That could have a 3 gigaton carbon dioxide benefit. And to me, the co-benefits here are significant. When you think about the Gulf Coast of Florida, our mangroves are essential to so much of our economy. They are the nurseries for our fisheries, which provide both commercial and recreational value. They're part of our ecotourism and also really important in terms of resilience for storms. The coastline that had wetlands protecting them in our recent storms did have a little bit of a buffer from the storm surge. So it's really important to protect them for many reasons. All right. So I hope that that is an interesting approach to understanding what's really all good solutions. None of those were wrong answers. Each of the top 100 solutions are part of the portfolio of options for making progress in moving toward reducing and reversing climate change. I want to share a few analyses of these top 100 and that are really interesting. I hope you started to see a theme of food and agriculture and food waste in a lot of those top ranked solutions. So when you look at it as sector, food actually was the #1 sector with 8 of the top 20 solutions related to food and agriculture. So really fascinating and often a set of solutions that people don't connect with climate change. The next sector actually that was really interesting was women and girls. If you look at the combination of educating girls and family planning, they were at numbers 6 and 7 and have a huge benefit, particularly in the developing world. A lot of opportunity there. And like I said, a really big benefit in terms of social progress and economic benefit as well. This is from Drawdown, and they've broken the solutions, the 100 solutions up into sectors. So you can see that food and electricity end up being very significant. Women and girls is there in the middle. You can see transportation on the side. None of this means that you shouldn't pay attention to transportation. It just gives you a sense of the opportunity scale within each of these sectors. And I also like to talk to people about, start where you're most interested. So if you and your family are really interested in growing your own food and looking into how to support your local food system, you can look at the solutions in red. If you're really interested in how to address our transportation emissions, you can look at the solutions on the far right. Just sort of start where you are, where you're most passionate, and there's a whole set of solutions no matter where you want to come at this from. This is another visualization of the same information. In this case, it's a pie chart based on the ranking. So you can see the highest potential of solution all the way through. But again, it's sort of a rainbow of options. all of these are important. They're the top 100 that can really make a difference. So pick whichever pie piece is most interesting to you, and let's get started. Drawdown also talks about the sinks again, so the sources of emissions and the sinks that absorb those from going into the atmosphere. So if you want to think about which of those is interesting to you, you might want to look at agricultural practices, you might want to look at land preservation and conservation. And a lot of those solutions on the sink side also have water quality benefits and wildlife benefits. So again, so many pieces of this will support other things that you might be passionate about as well. Now, if you are in a workplace and you might be in a leadership role or want to get engaged as an employee, Drawdown has this program called Climate Solutions at Work. It's a whole document specifically about how to apply these solutions in a workplace, in a business. It could be big or small businesses, and you could be a high-ranking or just an average employee, and there's strategies in here for everyone to take forward and think about that you in your workplace and our day-to-day work environment, what can we do to make a difference within that business sector? We were very fortunate, and we brought Paul Hawken here to talk to our community when this book first came out 4 or 5 years ago, and we developed this pledge sheet that localizes these solutions that were suggested from the global level down to really what you can do as an individual here in Florida. And we will be sending this out to you when we send the slides and the evaluation materials. So I'd encourage you to sit down with your family, look at this and see which of these solutions are feasible and you're most interested in, and then make a pledge. Check that box and say, in the next 3 months, we're going to try to become a reducitarian. We're going to start composting. We're going to get an energy audit. We're going to try more biking and reduce the vehicle miles traveled in our vehicles. So a whole lot of opportunities here for you. Check 3 or 4 of them and see where you can start making a difference. The other amazing resource that has been developed by the Science Environment Council of Southwest Florida is the Green Living Toolkit, very easy web address of greenlivingtoolkit.org. And you can click on each of these sectors and it digs deep into all of them. And you can find the solutions again that are most interesting and feasible for you and your family to make a difference. They have case studies, they have links to resources and how-to videos and all kinds of really cool things there at the Green Living Toolkit. And then there's also incentives available from the Inflation Reduction Act that passed in 2022. So there are tax credits that are available, and then there are also going to be rebates coming in 2025. So you can learn more about the tax credits at the links that will be in this presentation that I send to you. But really, 30% tax credit on efficiency improvements in your home, and then additional improvements for lower income households and nonprofits serving them. So a lot of opportunity. These are some examples of the improvements that are eligible for these improvements. So for these incentives, definitely if you're thinking about making changes in your home, you have some financial support from these tax credits. And I'd encourage you to take advantage of those. So these are the rebates that will be coming through the state in 2025. So have a look at those. And then if you want to learn about any of these solutions, we have a lot of classes out there through Extension. I know some of you aren't local to Sarasota, but a lot of ours are done through webinars, and you also likely have an Extension office in your county. Some of them do energy related work. A lot of them do landscaping related work. So just reach out and have a look at our Eventbrite class list. We have classes on efficiency, on solar, on electric vehicles, on recycling and composting, and even on green business solutions and water conservation. So a lot of those that ranked very high in Drawdown, we have specific classes on each of those solutions. This is just some highlights of the upcoming classes we have. One of them is Tips for a Sustainable New Year on January 6th, if you'd like to sign up for that one. And then a whole lot more of other things that we here at Sarasota County Extension offer. Just get that QR code and look at our Eventbrite page and sign up. One resource I want to make sure you're aware of is we have this fact sheet about the carbon sequestration benefit of planting various types of trees. So I mentioned the significant impact that we can have by increasing the sequestration for carbon, but trees are valued differently from a sequestration benefit. And so then we went through and listed each of the trees, and the annual and the lifetime carbon dioxide benefit, as well as the stormwater runoff. So a gumbo limbo and a mahogany actually ranked highest, along with an East Palatka holly on an annual level. So if you're choosing what tree to plant in your backyard, or as you're doing some landscaping changes in your neighborhood, you might want to think about these as part of your plant selection decision. All right, so I have one more poll, if you don't mind humoring me. And this one's about, now that you've learned all this, where do you think you can most easily make a change in your life? Which of these sectors? Is it within your building? Is it within energy use, type, and efficiency? Maybe in the food sector, land use, materials, transportation, or women and girls? Where do you plan to make a change? And while you're thinking about that one, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat, because we are almost done, and I'll take some time at the end to answer those. So this is sort of related to that pledge sheet that I said we'll send you. So which column of that pledge sheet do you think you might pay most attention to as you're trying to make some changes going forward? Great. I'm seeing a lot of potential change in the food sector, as well as in the energy and transportation. So thank you all for being thoughtful about that. And I hope once you get the resources from the from this presentation, that you'll look at that pledge sheet, and you'll spend some time thinking about what makes most sense for you, and really make some commitments of what you want to move forward with. So in summary, I want to come back to this slide. I hope that today you've gotten this very clear and science-based message that climate change is real, it is human caused, the science is very clear, and it's serious. We are already facing some significant impacts, but there is so much that we can do that will make a tremendous difference. If you think about those projection curves, do we want to end up on that top projection curve or in that lower projection curve? And if we want to be in those lower numbers, all of those 100 solutions that we just talked about are there for us to make a difference. And there's so much that we can be doing today on an individual and on a national and global level. So I want to thank the Science Environment Council and the Green Living Toolkit, tremendous resources and a network of organizations working on this locally. And I want to thank you for joining us today. It's really great to have you all. Thank you so much.